In this lesson, I'm sketching a blue and yellow iris, and this has to be one of my favorite flowers ever. It has quite the complex construction, but I love the graphic quality of those little veins and dots and the spectacular colors of it. So I'm starting my drawing at the top. There is not really an overall shape, maybe a loose triangle, but I'm not really following that. So I'm trying to to place the top petals in the right place, and then where they come together, there are 3 more petals that are sort of shaped like small roofs. So I just need to get the curves of those into the right direction, and from there down to the bottom there are 3 large petals that are unfolding down below. So I've practiced sketching irises a few times in my sketchbook, so by now I'm quite comfortable with drawing them and with the particular shapes that they have. And as a small helper, I've placed a dot down there where I think the bottom petal will come down to. It's even slightly shorter than that. And let's not forget the stalk. So even if it's hidden behind the rest of the flower, I think it's important to add it because, this blossom doesn't float through space. It needs a bit of a grounding, and the indication of the stalk can give you this. So the petals have all kinds of creases and folds and these really not very easy to draw shapes. And one way to see these is to understand the petals as these kind of flat bands or ribbons that are curled in space and that you can sort of follow around the curve. And I think the key here to these really complex shapes is drawing them at least once, or at least trying to draw them once from life. Because if you hold a flower, if you see a flower directly in front of you, then you can turn it, or you can change your position, and then you will have a much better understanding of its different shapes, of how it is built. You can even take it apart. So this is something I can recommend to everyone who wants to sketch flowers. So I'm thinking about the colors that I want to mix, and we have 2 different violets. So I'm starting with a quite intense dioxazine violet here. It's really dark, and I'm turning it into more of a blue violet with a bit of ultramarine blue here. So I really like this color. And then we have this sort of warm violet or more of a purple, and I've added a bit of quinacridone magenta. And I'm just mixing a lot of color here because I know for these large petals I'm going to need a lot of paint. And then we also have this yellow, this interesting complementary contrast here going on. And I have a warm yellow and a bit of raw sienna mixed in for these yellow areas. So quite the striking color combination. Starting my painting process, and I want to keep the shapes very simple and flat in the first wash to give them this interesting graphic look. And I start with my blue violet and a big brush and just dropping this into the shapes of the top petals. And although I paint them separately, I don't mind if the 2 shapes blend together and there's actually a 3rd petal in the back. So if the paint flows together, it doesn't really matter because I can pick out the edges in my 2nd layer. So I try to paint the petal in the back a bit lighter, just a bit lighter, and I drop a bit of additional pigment into those front areas. And I add the same color on the bottom petals. So it's not on the entirety of the petals. I'm finding the shape with my brush. And again, I'm using the biggest brush I've got to really have this flow and these loose lines. I'm using a slightly lighter wash on the right for the petal that is slightly receding there in the back. So I want to show that it's turned a bit to the back, and it's actually also lighter in my reference, so I think this makes for a good contrast. I'm already adding a bit of those interesting veins and dot structures there. And while the violet is drying, I can also add in the yellow parts. They are not actually touching, so the colors don't flow into each other. With a complementary contrast, this would mean the two colors together would end up gray, but since there are no overlapping areas, this means I can get away with this. And I really love these contrasting colors. And as the yellow and the violet has dried, I can add in the warm purple in the middle. And it's not entirely dry, so it's flowing a bit into each other, but I don't mind that. It's actually a nice, interesting effect. For my second blue-violet layer, I use a stronger mix and add shadows and creases, and I use my smaller brush to be able to have a lot of brush control. And as I do this, I squint and observe, and I try to keep it very simple. And I also try to keep these very smooth and quick flowing brush strokes. So I don't want to noodle in endless details. I want a few details, few interesting strokes, but I don't want those to look overworked. And again, at this stage, I can pick out some of the contours and redefine them so that they actually read as being in the front. And I can do the same thing for those purple petals. So I add those turned up corners with slightly darker purple. And this makes the purple petals look three-dimensionally immediately. So there's not much to do. I don't want to overwork them. They're pretty small. They have these interesting upturned corners. And now, while all of this is drying, I can add in a bit of green. This is just sap green that I will add for the stalk. I actually forgot a bit to add a bit of yellow down there. And I will have to let this dry. And now I'm switching to my small brush again and start adding the veins with violet paint. So this is almost like drawing with a brush. And this is the really fun part. I still have to be mindful not to overdo it and to decide on a few central elements here. So I try to follow the direction of growth, starting at the base and then fading out the line bit by bit. And at this stage, it's really the most fun stage for me of the painting, but it's also where I have to restrict myself the most. I think I have already talked about this. So I try to be mindful about reinforcing contour lines, adding a few textures that are sort of representational for the entire flower. And I also change the intensity of the paint. So for this petal that's slightly lighter and slightly receding, I use a bit more diluted violet, and I don't make the lines as contrasty and as prominent as the lines on the petal in the front. So as I said, this is a really fun process for me, and there are so many interesting graphic elements on the iris. I've just reinforced the contour lines of the curled petal here in the front. There are so many dots and little veins. And what I'm looking for here is a graphic representation of these elements, not a realistic depiction of everything that's on this flower, because this would take hours. So again, I'm reinforcing some of the contours here just to make the sketch read a bit better. And I think it's finished. Oh no, I have to add the green elements of the stalk here. So I know that irises look really complex on first sight, but once you get the hang of it, they're really amazing to sketch. If you enjoyed this tutorial, it is part of a longer online course called Loose But Precise Florals. In this course, you can learn how to sketch flowers with a combination of detailed line work and flowing watercolor washes. This loose but precise approach will help you to draw and paint fresh and expressive botanicals rather than overworking your sketches. You will learn a detailed but playful approach for combining line work with watercolor. The core principles of this sketching approach, like shape, volume, value, and color, can be applied to any subject matter with the same expressive results. We'll do warm-up exercises to capture the essence of floral sketches, and there will be several full-length demos. Flowers are a great subject to draw for beginners, and whether you've just started painting with watercolors or are an intermediate artist, I will show you a really inspiring way to sketch florals. I'd love to see you in this course to sketch some beautiful flowers together, so I hope you'll join me there.